the drive. Tatum the finish. It is Baylor 18. The mission commanding is mission accomplished.
What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, recording right after the Celtics beat the Trailblazers to make it 5 straight wins and improve to 51-19. Pretty remarkable record, especially considering their pretty inconsistent 6 weeks of basketball from earlier in the season. So I want to talk to you about today on the latest episode of You Got Boston about a couple of things and big Maine Celtics focus for today's episode. So just a heads up, laying it out there to start. I think we saw a couple of former Maine Celtics players be hugely important in this game, so it feels very fitting that guys like Sam Hauser, Luke Cornett, who do we see tonight? Baylor Scheierman, JD Davison, all contribute to this win, all have one thing in common, and that's that their introduction to the Celtics organization begins in Portland. So I want to talk a little bit about that and the time that I spent in Portland this week. I went to practice on Wednesday, and I kind of went behind the scenes, watched film, watched the team practice, and just kind of saw what is going on behind closed doors in this G League program. The Maine Celtics have now won 15 of 18 games, so they've been hugely successful. They're winning games, and at the same time, they're able to look back and say, while we prioritize winning, we're seeing that the alumni, the people that have kind of gone through the program, gone through the development, are massively contributing to Boston. And so, yeah, that's going to be what this episode is about. This latest episode of You Got Boston. I'm not on the road right now, but I am heading to Phoenix. And so I'll be at the games, the second half of the road trip, Phoenix, San Antonio, and Memphis. So I'll do some episodes live from the road as I'm able to kind of do some reporting. We'll see what the latest is on Jaylen Brown. Not going to talk a whole lot about the sale. Obviously, that's big Celtics news, but I just don't have a ton of insight on it. I'll just say very quickly that I think Bill Chisholm, he seems like a nice guy. He has been handling his PR well, saying the right things. It's nice that he comes from the area. It's nice that he has some roots to the organization, being a lifelong fan. All that is good. I think probably Steve Pavliuka being the owner would have been nice from like just a lack of, you wouldn't have had to make much of a change at that point because, you're having the same owner that's been a part-time, long-time owner, has a great relationship with the players. So that would have been like my pick, I guess. Not knowing all the finances. So I guess that was a little bit of a disappointment, just that he didn't get the bid. And I think a lot of people thought that he was going to get it. But ultimately, I don't think we have enough information right now to have much of a take on the ownership thing. We haven't had a press conference. I haven't seen a lot about this guy besides for just the fact that he's really wealthy and he comes from private equity. He currently lives in California. He's probably going to buy a house in Massachusetts. So very basic things. And we don't really have a sense of how he is going to handle spending or decision-making. Wick staying on as a governor for a couple of years right now. That sounds nice. But also I don't know exactly what that means because, Mark Cuban was going to stay on and he obviously doesn't have any power with the Mavericks. So not doing like a whole episode on this. I've talked about it on other platforms on the Garden Report. I did a podcast with Bobby Manning. So we have talked about it, but I just figured I don't have a ton new to add at this point. So I'll be doing some reporting and looking into it and hopefully having some more perspectives to add to all of you soon. But in the meantime, I have some things that I do want to talk about because I do have some original reporting and original thoughts. And that's where the Celtics are at right now when it comes to the bench and kind of the end of bench players. Celtics beat the Blazers tonight. It was a really good win. Obviously, right now, wins don't really count for a whole lot. If you're looking at the standings, they're still like 5 games behind the Cavs, despite the Cavs falling a little bit behind, losing 4 straight and making it so that we're all kind of wondering, was there a door? Was there an opportunity here for the Celtics to catch up to the Cavs? It doesn't seem within reach right now. The Cavs bounced back tonight and blew out the Utah Jazz, who are really aggressively tanking, it seems like. But I think where I'm standing right now and kind of what I've been thinking through is, what is the point of these games? If the Celtics are not able to move up in the standings, they're not going to slide down to number 3. What is the point of these games ultimately? And I think there's a couple of different points to them. And I think tonight versus the Portland Trailblazers, you're able to see what has made this team a championship team in the past. And I actually felt like last year, one of the keys to what made this team a championship team was this understanding that everybody had to have this championship mentality. Everybody had to be ready. The stay ready group thing, Jayson Tatum, I think, was the first person to say it. I'm sure it came from Joe and the coaching staff. But everybody bought into this idea that if you're on this team, you are ready to go if your number is called upon. And there have been moments this year where it was Drew Peterson that contributed to winning. There was the Jaden Springer game versus LA on the Clippers, who he's literally not even a part of the team anymore. Jordan Walsh has had his moments. Torrey Craig has had his moments. Everybody's had their moments. Demias Queta has contributed to a bunch of games. Luke Cornett, Sam Hauser, you go beyond the starting five in Al, because he's honestly a starter at this point. Even Peyton Pritchard, who has had a lot of success offensively this season and putting up numbers and kind of getting rewarded for it. Everybody's contributed to winning for this team. And I think where you see it the most is when multiple guys are out of the starting lineup, they don't miss a beat. They really don't. And I look through the game logs, and it's like they have been missing 2 or 3 starters in so many games of late, and their win percentage is exactly the same. They don't take any sort of dive when that happens. In this game against the Blazers, they are without Jaylen Brown, who has been dealing with this knee bruise, which we're hopefully going to get an update on in the next few days. But he's missed 6 or 7 games for this now. No Jrue Holiday, who I looks like he's just getting a rest night, his first night of a back-to-back. He was listed as out with the right shoulder, same injury that he had earlier in the year, but I don't think it's anything new. Kristaps Porzingis return from illness. He gets the rest night. So they split those guys. Those 3 guys got night 1 off. I'm sure against the Kings, we'll see probably Al get a rest night. Maybe Tatum even gets a rest night. So we'll see. But this team doesn't miss a beat. Peyton Pritchard inserted into the starting lineup. He gets some early injuries, early fouls, not a huge deal. Derrick White slots in, plays 37 minutes, scores 17 points on 6 of 12 shooting, 8 assists, just a solid Derrick White performance. Jayson Tatum has a slow first half, and in the second half, he goes off. He finishes the night with 30 points, 9 assists, and 9 rebounds. So just so close to a triple-double. Kind of ridiculous when you think about how he kind of did it quietly, minus the pretty loud third quarter. So everybody else is stepping up. I didn't even get to Sam Hauser, who had 24 points on 8 of 10 from 3. Just ridiculous shooting for him. Al Horford had a nice night. So if we just kind of look down the roster here, a lot of big-time performances against a Blazers team that's been pretty good, honestly. And a Blazers team that has been able to, string together wins, play good defense, be competitive against good teams. Luke Cornett, I got to give him a shout out. He scores 13 points. He's a plus 11, 6 of 6 from the field, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. He's just playing at another level. And honestly, there's a whole discussion to be had around, can Luke Cornett even stay in Boston next year? Is he going to inevitably get a bag that he can turn down because he's always played on minimum contracts, and he's just not a minimum player anymore. He's just not. And so you look down the line, and there's a very clear mentality where guys are able to step up and contribute to winning. And I thought last year in March was a really important stretch because the Celtics team, they had a 14-game lead in the Eastern Conference standings at one point. Just the games were meaningless. And so you have to figure out, how do you still care about these games? How do you make sure that guys are locked in and showing up and competing? Because you don't want to build bad habits that then all of a sudden now it's the first time of the playoffs and you have to step out of them, but you've already been turning the ball over, not rebounding, not sharing the ball, whatever else it is. And I think I give a lot of credit to everybody that's been playing during the stretch here, because regardless of who's been out and regardless of who's been on the floor, you really haven't seen much of a drop-off. And I think Baylor Scheierman has epitomized that a ton. Obviously, he had the 20-point night last week versus the Nets. That's going to be the one that everybody remembers when they think about Baylor Scheierman in March. Sets a career high, shoots 6 of 7 from 3, gets, the water thrown at him post-game in his post-game interview. So that was the Baylor Scheierman game. In this one, he didn't jump out at you. He has 6 points, 3 assists, 5 rebounds in 26 minutes. I thought he played really well. I thought that he played with great energy. I thought that he made great plays. Not all of them panned out. There were a couple of times where he went to take a charge and he wasn't able to get one, or he didn't shoot spectacularly. He was 2-5 from 3, so it's fine. But I thought that Baylor Scheierman was one of the guys that was ready to go tonight. He just was. Torrey Craig came in. I thought he looked ready to go. He played really hard. Finished with 5 points on 2 of 3 shooting. One of the misses was an air ball, or the only miss was an air ball that he later recovered on the follow-up and found J.D. Davison for corner 3. So made his mark on this game. So the reason I'm going through and listing out all these guys' individual performances is because I thought tonight perfectly epitomized what made last year's team successful and why they were able to kind of coast through the playoffs. And I hate to say it that way because obviously when you're watching it, it doesn't feel like a coast, but they went 60-3 down the stretch after a historic regular season. Really didn't miss a beat, never really got overly challenged. And you saw at different moments, different guys step up, whether that was Sam Hauser in the finals playing critical minutes, whether that was Peyton Pritchard in moments. You saw different people step up in different moments and just be ready to go, and also have this level of unity that I remember Jrue Holiday being asked after they won the championship, how do you want to be remembered? And he said, a team that played together. Like, that's what they wanted to be known as. And a lot of the Stay Ready stuff is about togetherness. It's about being willing to accept that it may not be your time right now, but it's going to be your time. And you're right now, you might just be in a moment where you're rooting people on, or you're just being a good teammate, you're being a connector. You're not necessarily getting yours. And so this is something that's not that new to anybody. I'm sure everybody is familiar with the Stay Ready group concept and just kind of all of that. But I watched a lot of Maine Celtics. I know some people care about that, some people don't. And one of the things that I just started realizing is just how much of an imprint the Maine Celtics have on the Boston Celtics. So just going down the line here tonight. Sam Hauser, 24 points, 8 of 10 3-point shooting, Maine Celtics alum. Derrick White played in the G League, but not in Maine. Baylor Scheierman, rotation minutes tonight. He also Maine Celtics alum, spent most of the year in Maine until a couple weeks ago when he came to Boston. J.D. Davison played 8 minutes tonight. Thought that it was one of his best stints as a professional. He had 4 points, an assist, a rebound, a steal. Made his only 3, made his only shot. And also, Maine Celtics alum, big-time alum, franchise leader in points, assists, and steals. So, another guy who was just able to slot in. I don't think he would have thought that he's playing. Obviously, he wasn't in Maine today. He's on this road trip alongside Drew Peterson, who did not play. Neemias Queta and Jordan Walsh both didn't play in this game, but obviously have had extended stretches where they've played quite a bit, especially Queta, where he's really had to shoulder, significant minutes at the center position with Kristaps Porzingis out earlier in the year. Last year, there were stretches when he was still on a two-way, where he had a significant role, and now he's on a fully guaranteed deal. So basically, if you look up and down this roster is some really expensive players at the top: Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Jrue Holiday, a couple of mid-tier players, Derrick White, Al Horford, Peyton Pritchard, Sam Hauser, and then a bunch of guys that are playing on really minimum deals. And half the roster has significant experience in Maine. And so that's why I find this whole Maine thing really interesting. I find the whole story of what's going up there. And so I went up there on Wednesday, and I basically had this question of, how does this program continue to win games? Because last year they literally made it to the finals. They lost the deciding game, so they came one game within winning the championship, which would have been their first ever. And at the same time, they're prioritizing developing prospects. They're not prioritizing winning at the expense of developing prospects, because we're seeing the guys coming out of Maine are ready to contribute to the Boston Celtics. So that was my question. I watch them a lot on TV. I go up there whenever I can. Sometimes the schedule doesn't allow it. But I thought to myself, this is the stretch of time where the Maine guys get an opportunity. So at the same time, let me go up there and kind of investigate and see what is happening behind the scenes that's allowing this team to be so successful in every way, both in the developmental ways and also on the court. And so we'll talk a little bit about that after the break. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select players' projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. This week on PrizePicks, I'm looking at the basketball board and I'm selecting Jayson Tatum for more than 29 points and Anthony Edwards for more than 25 points. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. So when I was in Maine earlier this week, the head coach of the Maine Celtics is Tyler Lashbrook, who is super beloved. Everybody talks about how down-to-earth he is. Everybody talks about how he spends time getting to know every single person on the roster, 1 through 13. And he comes from the Philadelphia 76ers, where he worked in player development and video coordinating and a bunch of other things for like 5 years before he came to Boston last season. So Tyler was an assistant on the championship team, and he has that experience of being a part of that playoff run. He worked in player development last year, but he was with Boston, and Blaine Miller was the head coach of the Maine Celtics. Then Blaine follows Charles Lee to Charlotte, and he gets an assistant position there, so he's no longer in Boston, no longer in the Celtics organization. So they appoint Tyler Lashbrook to be the head coach of Maine. and he's just getting rave reviews. So I do want to start off by giving him a lot of the credit for why Maine has been so successful, because just being up there, everybody talks about him super highly. And he's a great guy. He's super friendly with the media. He appreciates us being up there. So it's great to cover him and to get the chance to just kind of get to know him and to see him interacting with the players and everything. At the same time, this team started off a little bit rough. I think they lost. They were like 2-6 at one point. And they're losing games and they're trying to figure it out. And they're really angered by JD Davison, who's on his third consecutive two-way contract with the Celtics. And that's the first guy, the only guy in the NBA that's in that position that you only get 3 two-ways. So this is it for him. He was drafted 3 years ago in the second round, and he has to get an NBA opportunity at some point this season or in the offseason, or else this is it for him. Like, he's not going to stay. I would be very surprised if he stayed in the G League not on a two-way, right? Regular G League players make like $40K a year. Two-ways make like $600,000, so it's also a tremendous difference in that sense. But JD is awesome. He's been having an insane year. He's averaging like 26 points and 8 assists. Everybody we've talked to, everybody says he's the G League MVP. Mac McClung said it at All-Star Weekend. I was talking to Maine Celtics players. They were saying he's the G League MVP. Like, that's the level of consistency and how he's elevated guys around him. So I'm up there and I'm poking around. I watched the film session, very similar to like my high school film sessions, or watching people they were talking about pick and rolls and pick, screening angles was a big theme. I'll just shout that out because that's something that I think doesn't get a lot of like screen time, but the angles with which players screen, super important. Something that makes Luke Cornett enormously valuable. That was a huge focus of film. Really, defense was the big focus. They were talking about kind of the key to the team's success over the last 20 games is that they had the best defensive rating in the G League. And they actually, Tyler gave a lot of the credit to JD Davison, who's an undersized guard who doesn't necessarily always get the opportunity to be a great defender depending on the matchups and things, but he's really made it a point to be as good of a defender as possible. So JD locked in the defensive end, is kind of contagious. They have this group now, Drew Peterson, also a returning player. So JD and Drew are constantly able to call out players and basically say like, hey, we're not playing at a championship level. And when they speak, it carries weight because those two guys are from the Boston Celtics. And those two guys saw a championship firsthand. They were there alongside the run. They were not active because they're two-way players. They weren't able to play. But they were just as much a part of it as anybody else that didn't play, right? Like, what's ultimately the difference between that and Jordan Walsh, who also didn't get minutes in the playoffs? So all those guys have carried this kind of weight of like, we're a part of the Boston Celtics. And so I talked to a bunch of the players about it, and they all said, yeah, absolutely, we're part of the Boston Celtics. And it actually helps them when they're trying to overcome this feeling of like, you're dealing with the fact that you're playing limited minutes. You're maybe not putting up huge stats. Everybody focuses on the guys in the G League that are dominating, but there's a bunch of guys that are in the same position as the stay ready guys in Boston. And that's the Maine Celtics stay ready guys. And so the more I talk to people and the more I watched the practice and I watched film and I've been watching these games, the more I realized that what's happening in Maine is a microcosm of what's happening in Boston. You have the guys at the top. JD Davison is like the guy. He's like the Jayson Tatum of Maine, right? He's taking 20 shots a game. He's playing 35 minutes a game. Everything revolves around him, as it should, because he's a really good player. And then you have guys that are kind of the unsung heroes who maybe sometimes play and sometimes don't. There's Cameron Warrant, who is somebody that is played D2 basketball and is right now seeing very sporadic minutes in the G League. Sometimes he plays, sometimes he gets complete DNPs. It really depends sometimes on whether or not the two ways are there. So if the two ways are in Boston, then there's more opportunities to go around in Maine. If the two ways are all in Maine, then everybody kind of gets bumped down in the rotation, and everything's about the two ways, right? So you have to have a good mindset. So I have a story about this coming out on Celtics blog later this week, so I won't say like the whole story right now, but I do think it's an interesting concept. It's basically about the stay ready guys in Maine and what their impact is on the organization. And you can kind of look through the storyline, and where I kind of landed on this is there's the Celtics winning the championship. Then there's right below that, there's the contributions of guys like Sam Hauser, who was obviously very clearly critical. There's contributions of guys like Luke Cornett and Amish Queta and Jordan Walsh, who didn't necessarily play a ton of the playoffs, but were very much a part of why they were able to get the record that they were able to get, which in turn gave them home court advantage and the easiest route in the playoffs they could have. So that's all part of them winning the championship. And then there's the question of like, how did those guys get to be successful, right? How did Sam Hauser go from being undrafted to being a guy shooting 50% in the finals and playing great defense on Luka and ultimately being a big part of that run? And my hypothesis here, and this is what I kind of broke down in a very long story that you can check out, is that it comes down to those other guys, because you have the same exact philosophies in Boston that you do in Maine. So it's these guys that you've actually never heard of, that unless you're tuning into Maine Celtics games, but I know some people are. DJ Rodman, who's Dennis Rodman's son, great prolific rebounder, former forward at USC. He's a guy that sometimes is the man in Maine, and sometimes he's completely out of the rotation. James Banks III, Cameron Warrens, Kavion Pippen. The list goes on of these guys who are just locked in to doing their part, playing their role. I asked Cameron Warrens, you're in the G League right now. You want to be in the NBA. You're barely playing, right? Like mentally, how do you get to the point where you're able to lock in and say, it's okay that I got the NP in the G League, even though I want to be an NBA player, right? Like you're not going to be first up when contracts are being handed out. This is what he said. He said, there's a season for everything. There's a season to play and there's a season to cheer on your teammates. And I feel like right now I'm in a season to cheer on my teammates. And I'm bought into that because I know once we win, we all win. He also said, it's just a championship organization. You can feel the intensity that the Boston Celtics have. We have that too. So DJ Rodman, he said, I just want to win and do everything I can to reflect winning, whether it's getting rebounds, making an extra pass, making the big shot. I just want to help win. And because at the end of the day, teams want winners. Like no matter what I asked these guys, it was just winning. And I think about when we interviewed, Tatum and Brown or Joe Mazzulla, it's all it is about winning. It's not about MVP. It's not about all-star. It's not about anything else. It's just about winning. And it's about, can you impact winning? And the messaging is exactly the same in Maine, and it extends through guy number 13. And I watch a lot of G League games. A lot of times guys are trying to get there. It's trying to score their points. They're trying to go off for 30, go off for 40, show teams like, hey, I'm putting up crazy numbers, sign me. And this team is different. And that's why they were in the championship game last year. And it's why they're once again on pace to be one of the best teams in the league. James Banks, he says, I'm a connector on the floor. My main job, is to get these guys shots. So he's talking about Drew Peterson, JD Davison, Miles Norris, who they just signed. His job is to get them shots. And he said in the G League, that's what you got to do. You got to see what role you can fill. I'm a defending big, a lob threat. So although I want crazy numbers and whatnot, nobody in the league is looking for me to come in and be Jokic. If I'm going to get my 2-way, if I'm going to get my 10-day, it's going to be off my defense, off my rebounding. So thinking about like Luke Cornett here, the kind of stuff that he says where he doesn't care about his minutes. He doesn't care about his points. He's just going to do the little things to win. There's like a smaller version of that happening in Portland. And it might not seem super relevant to the average Celtics fan. And maybe some people are sitting here being like, this is boring and irrelevant to me. And that's fine. And that's fair. But I found it really interesting because I watched Baylor Scheierman play tonight. And I thought to myself, this is a really good player. And he looked pretty spotty in the preseason. He looked like he didn't have his confidence. He couldn't hit shots. And some of that's just natural. He just literally started his pro career. But he went up to Maine and he worked really hard. And he was putting up good numbers. And he was playing the right way, diving on the floor, getting rebounds, playing defense. And he came back and he's a different guy. And I think that stint was hugely impactful for him. And everybody talks about him really highly. On the bus over from the hotel to the Portland Expo where they practiced, everybody was talking about Baylor Scheierman is what a game. Like he had just had this massive game versus the Nets. Everybody was celebrating it. They were thrilled for him. And so there's something about this organization that's not just about what's happening in Boston. It's all connected. And I know I get a knack for being like obsessed with the Maine Celtics players and everything. And I get that. And I do think I maybe disproportionately talk and think about the whole thing. But I also think it's pretty undercovered. So that's part of why I cover it, is because it doesn't get a lot of coverage from Boston media. But being up there and talking to these guys, whether it was Cameron Warrens or James Banks, there's other guys too. Those are the guys that I spoke to and I interviewed. But there's other guys in the organization that are just not getting consistent minutes. Hassan Ward, who is one of the best shot blockers in the G League. You look at this list and it's like, these are guys that are basically accepting the situation that they're in, doing everything they can to contribute to winning, and not really worrying about their stats because they understand that they're elevating the players around them. And in turn, it means that guys are able to develop and get better and come to Boston. And then in Boston, where you have a couple guys making a ton of money, you're going to need cheap talent. And Maine continues to be the funnel for that. And it doesn't mean that everybody's a smashing success. It doesn't mean that Jordan Walsh is the best backup forward in the league. But all of these guys have played substantial NBA minutes this year. And Sunday night kind of was a perfect example of that, because you see Sam Hauser, who started in Maine and perfectly epitomizes how you go from being an undrafted player, living in a hotel in downtown Portland in the G League, to being this guy who is now on a 4-year, $45 million contract, playing NBA Finals minutes, being a critical part of the championship run. We talk about his back all the time. We're worried about him. We want to make sure he's good to go. Like, it's because he's so important, right? He's a perfect example of that. I asked Jordan Walsh about when Sam Hauser signed his contract. He said, now his name is going to be in the banners everywhere in Maine. Everyone's going to see, here's a guy that climbed the ladder. And Jordan said that to me in Vegas in Summer League. And that was just a couple days after Sam signed the extension, or the 4-year contract, I should say. And it's true. Like, his name is constantly refer to. I talked to Tyler Lashbrook. He said that in training camp, he took all the guys out on a lobster boat. They did some lobster catching in the Gulf of Maine and did this big team bonding activity. And then afterwards, they have dinner. And he projected all the faces of the guys that started in Maine who are now in Boston. And basically, we're like, this is the story. This is how this goes. He said, this is, at the end of the day, player development. This is what it looks like. It was them in Maine and then them in the Celtics. And I think this is one of the underlying stories that gets undercovered to what's made this team so successful. It's not, you have three guys on your bench, Peyton Pritchard, Luke Kornet, and Sam Hauser, that have been there for years, that are playing together. There was a moment today where Luke Kornet kicked it out to Sam in the corner, and it was like a pass you only make when you've been playing with somebody for years, and you know exactly where they're going to be, and they know they're gonna get the pass. They're ready to shoot it, and that's a big part of why Sam has been so successful, because he plays alongside Pritchard and Luke and these other guys that have played with him for years. And so I'm a big fan of the continuity. I think the continuity is a big part of why this team has been so successful. And at the same time, I'm also a big fan of the fact that there's a developmental program in Portland that's entertaining in its own right. Like, the fans in Portland love to go to watch the Maine Celtics play. They love to go to the Expo. There's a great atmosphere there. It's a 3,000 seat convention center that kind of resembles a high school gym. I basically think it's a high school gym. It looks like mine, and the locker rooms and everything seems very much like that. And so that's entertaining on its own. It's an opportunity for Celtics fans to go watch players at a much lower price point. For $20, you can go to a game rather than the $100 to get into a TD Garden for even the cheapest games. And while you're creating this product that's super fun and everybody worships JD Davison over there because he is this legend in Maine, you're also doing something that's critically important to the broader organization and its championship pursuits. So I have the whole story coming out on Celtics Blog. You can check that out. I thought that this was a good time to talk about it because this game featured a lot of Maine. JD Davison gets 8 minutes. Sam Hauser, 8 of 10 from 3. You saw Luke Kornet have just continue to play awesome basketball, and I'm just a huge fan of how he's able to impact this team. Him and Tatum have the second best pick and roll duo in the NBA right now after Jokic and Jamal Murray, which is just insane and also a little bit concerning as we think about, is there any way that you could resign this guy? I don't know. But yeah, you can call this a little bit the Maine Celtics episode. That they clinched their spot in the playoffs for the third consecutive year. And I think we'll see a really good playoff run from them under Tyler Lashbrook, under JD Davison, Drew Peterson, Miles Norris, who's been a great acquisition, but has only been with the team for a couple of weeks after they waived Anton Watson, who's now with the New York Knicks. And yeah, super fun to watch. I really enjoyed. I never had watched film with an NBA team before, so this was the closest that I've gotten to it. Seeing them in practice, seeing the guys the two ways had an optional practice, and JD Davison and Miles Norris were out there for a long time. JD is so locked in, so committed to this G League team. He was telling me that we need to win the championship. That's the goal. He fell short last year, so while he has the goal of becoming an NBA player and getting that opportunity, he's also able to compartmentalize the fact that he wants to win right now. And that's a huge priority for him. Quick shout out for our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the best ticketing app you can possibly find. Anytime I want to go to a concert, an event, I use the Game Time app to scroll through, see all the options, see what events are coming up in my city, typically in Boston, and I can go look at the options and select an event and purchase tickets. It's the easiest way to get tickets to see your favorite teams play. Even easier than ever before. Game Time Picks curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You got all-in pricing, so toggle this feature, show up the total upfront cost with no surprise fees at checkout. You got seat views, so you can actually see from the seat that you buy. You can say, okay, I'm going to the Celtics game. I want to make sure I have a good view of the Celtics bench. So you can look through the tickets and pick the seat that you are able to see the Celtics bench. You want to see the Celtics basket in the fourth quarter. All that you can figure out on Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So I'll wrap shortly here. But I think the last thing I just wanted to talk about is just being a part of a championship organization and how that affects people. I remember when Jaden Springer got to Boston, he said he just walked in and saw the banners and was like, okay, this is kind of crazy. There's higher expectations. I think Miles Norris, who just joined the Celtics, he's kind of figuring out how do you meet those expectations. You can't make little mistakes or slip ups that you can do for other G League teams. There's a different level of winning here. They've made it a point to connect the two franchises. Maine practices at the Auerbach Center when they're able to. You might recall when Kristaps Porzingis was coming back from injury, he used the Maine Celtics is a group of people to practice with, so they came up to Boston. He actually scrimmaged with them, and that was part of his rehabilitation process to get back from his leg injury to being able to play in NBA games. And you'll see alum all the time come to games. I was at a game that Sam Hauser was at not too long ago. Joe Mazzulla was sitting courtside at a game a couple weeks back with some of the assistant coaches. Craig Lucianen, who is the director of player development, who also has his roots in Maine, makes the trip whenever he's able to. So there's a very clear path of, trying to demonstrate from Boston that Maine is important. And it can be, it's cliche. You might think to yourself, like, okay, obviously they want us send that message. But then when you actually look at the Celtics roster and you realize half the roster has their roots in Maine, you realize why it matters. And sometimes it matters more than other times. I think Sam Hauser and Luke Kornet are the two biggest examples of success, but there's other examples that could be in the works. Like, who knows? Maybe Baylor Scheierman ends up becoming, like, critical to the Celtics in the future. He's on a cheap contract. They're going to need to get cheap talent to continue winning. Celtics, because we don't really know what the situation is with the new owner. So these guys are going to matter. And the guys that you've never heard of, whether it's the Cameron Warrens of the world or the DJ Rodmans, great guys, great players, can do a lot of different things, will probably get their chance in the G League and maybe in the NBA. But right now they're helping the whole machine work. They're part of the machine. Flashbrook said it's kind of what makes the whole thing tick. So wanted to talk a little bit about that today. I'll just say I thought J.D. Davison looked really good, just as an aside. He only got 8 minutes. I wish he got a little bit more. He benefited from the fact that Peyton Pritchard had some early foul trouble, hit his 1-3, but he's a great playmaker. That's really where he's at his best. He's a great playmaker, and he can score on all three levels. He's not a great shooter, but he also takes a lot of difficult shots, so part of it is his profile. But I think he can do it. I think he can translate over to the NBA. Incredibly high IQ, great leadership skills. IQ is like the biggest thing that everybody that I've talked about him to has really stressed to me, is like how important his IQ is. So we'll see how kind of things shake out here. For the rest of this road trip, I think we're going to see a lot more Maine Celtics performances as guys continue to get rest. I don't have a serious update on Jaylen Brown yet at this point. He's missed a few games with the bone bruise. I expect and hope that he'll be back at some point during this trip. If not, I think it's maybe a little bit more serious than we thought. But again, we haven't gotten a lot of information. We'll see if I can get anything more when I'm with the team in Phoenix. For now, I wanted to share a little bit about what I learned behind the scenes from going to Maine and just kind of understanding the Stay Ready group mentality that's over there and how it all ties into this bigger thing. So you can read my story. I'll be on post game for all these games in this road trip, so you can check that out on the Garden Report as well. CLNS Media, subscribe to You Got Boston if you haven't already. You can also listen to this podcast on Spotify, Apple, all the platforms. So feel free to check it out there, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find the show. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day.